and welcome to lectionaryq. I'm Dennis Sanders. I'm the pastor of First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, located in Roseville, Minnesota. And the Q, as I like to say in every podcast, stands for questions, because that's what we do every week. We take one of the scriptures from the Revised Common Lectionary, and we ask some questions. And the whole meaning of this podcast is a way for pastors to prepare for their Sunday sermons, but it's also a chance for the laity to take some time to step away from the busyness of the week. I usually record this on the middle of the week on Wednesdays and reflect on what God is saying to us. I do want to say that hopefully we should be back to a more regular schedule. I do want to kind of share why the last few weeks I didn't know if I was going to be able to make a podcast or not. And that was because about 2.5 weeks ago, my mother died. Some of you may have been aware that she had a stroke back in July, and she did die on the February 24th. And so kind of between that and then the her memorial service, which took place on the 9th of March, all the busyness and getting ready, I just wasn't sure what was going to be happening. So hopefully I should be back on a more regular schedule. Of course, end of the memorial service, and there will be a burial later on. She actually is lived in Michigan, didn't grow up in Michigan. She grew up in Puerto Rico, but my dad is buried in Michigan, and that's where I'm from. And so hopefully sometime in the spring, we will go to make sure that she can have her final resting place with Dad. So, but that's kind of what was been going on. But thank you for your just your patience. And for this podcast, these are the questions and reflections that we'll be looking at for this coming Sunday, which is March 17th, 2024, the 5th Sunday in Lent. And this week, we are looking at John chapter 12, verses 20 through 33. And what I will do is read first the reflection, and then we'll be asking those questions. So the reflection for this week is seeing Jesus. Those poor Greek visitors, they got more than they bargained for. They wanted to see Jesus, which I guess meant that they wanted to meet this guy that was causing such commotion in the land. My guess is that they had heard of Jesus' deeds and wanted to learn more about who this man was and maybe gain some wisdom. I'm interested in their request to see Jesus because, in a way, Jesus gives them a taste of seeing him in full. All that they wanted to do is see what all the commotion was all about. Scripture never says that they met him, but I'm guessing that they did. And when Jesus starts talking about seeds dying, and then there's this voice that seems to come out of nowhere, these folk have to be wondering what in the world is going on. Now, this story is found near the end of Jesus' ministry. Starting with chapter 13, begins really the Last Supper. And in John, this whole scene of the Last Supper is a really long one, because it's basically a long talk that Jesus gives to his disciples. Jesus knows right at this point that death is near, and he starts to tell the crowd that's gathered about his impending death by talking about seeds. Now, anyone who is a gardener or even a frustrated gardener knows that when you plant a seed, in some way it has to die for that plant to grow. To get a new life, that seed has to die. And Jesus was talking about his own death. For salvation to come into the world, it had to come through Jesus, a Jesus that would sacrifice his life for the life of the world. The death of Jesus wasn't the end, though. Just as a plant loses its leaves in the fall, lies dormant throughout the winter, and comes back to life again in the spring, so too will Jesus come back to life on Easter morning. Death doesn't have the last word. Now, as I read the scripture and started to put together this reflection, I'm reminded of the song by the Irish band U2, Pride in the Name of Love. This 1984 hit was really a song about Martin Luther King, but it's interesting that they wove in talk about Jesus in the song, and I don't think that was by accident. Martin Luther King, of course, wasn't Jesus, but he lived a cross-shaped life like Jesus, a life that was lived for others to the point of giving his own life on a hotel balcony in Memphis. Theologian Andrew Root talks about how our lives, used to not end when we die. Now, in our modern day, our lives end at death, or at least we think that that's when they end. And so, as people, we are busy trying so hard to amp up our lives, to make a difference, to promote ourselves. But death isn't the end of life. It wasn't the end for Jesus, and it doesn't end for us. And that's something that I'm taking to heart more these days in the aftermath of my mother's recent death. Amidst the pain of losing her, I'm reminded by a friend that I'm her legacy. And I know that as hard as it is to come to terms with her passing, I know that her death isn't the end. I look forward to the promise of the resurrection when I see her again. And I am honored and will try to be the legacy that she wanted. In the same way, we are the legacy of Christ, who was glorified in his death on a cross. We live a cross-shaped life where we die to ourselves and trust that the good news of Jesus lasts far after we pass from the scene. We trust in the resurrection, knowing that death isn't a final word in our lives and in the world. We wish to see Jesus. Seeing Jesus means seeing him on the cross, giving his life for the sake of the world. It's seeing Martin Luther King on that balcony. It's seeing the El Salvadoran priest Oscar Romero preaching on this very passage before he is gunned down during worship by militias. Seeing Jesus means seeing the cross and then joining Jesus in living a cross-shaped life. So here are the questions for this week. Number 1, what does it mean to hate your life? And what ways can one lose their lives? Number 2, what does it mean when Jesus says, Father, glorify your name? And number 3, why did Jesus say that the voice came for the sake of the crowd? So, what are your questions? And what are your answers? If you're feeling brave, why don't you send me your question or answer? And you can send that to lectionaryq at substack.com. That is it for this episode of Lectionary Q. If you want to find out more and listen to this episode, past episodes, and to subscribe, go to lectionaryq.substack.com. And I'd also suggest that you consider listening to my other podcasts that I do, Church and Main. That is a podcast I do on the intersection of faith and modern life. And the latest episode, which I will actually share for people who are subscribed to Lectionary Q, is with Joy J. Moore, who is a professor at Luther Seminary, which happens to be my alma mater in St. Paul. It's a really engaging interview where we talk about some of the modern issues that are in our culture and also on race relations. And so if you're interested, please go to the website, which is churchandmain.substack.com. And you can find out more in the show notes. Again, that's it for this episode of Lectionary Q. I pray that these questions and reflections will open the scripture and allow you to connect with God and to share the good news. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Take care, Godspeed, and I will see you very soon.